I'm a 32-year-old guy who's been living in the US for the past 15 years. I came here from a small Eastern European country when I was 17, chasing the kind of life my parents always dreamed of for me. Things were tough at first, but over time, I built something I'm proud of, a small business, a good circle of friends, and a place I can finally call home. But my brother Eric 35M has been making my life miserable lately, and now his actions might ruin everything I've worked so hard for. Eric and I haven't been close in years. Back when I was still living in my home country, he was the golden child. My parents depended on him for everything, from helping with bills to making family decisions. Even now, he sends money home every month and uses that as a way to control them. He's always acted like he knows what's best for everyone. When I decided to move to the US, by myself, he told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I guess proving him wrong only made him more bitter. While I was out here working 3 jobs to get through college, Eric stayed home and took over as the man of the house. My parents idolize him. To them, he's the responsible one who kept the family afloat while their youngest son ran off to chase some pipe dream. They don't see the side of him I do, the manipulative, controlling, self-righteous side. Fast forward to now, I've got a solid footing here. I run my own small business, and I'm financially stable. I've also kept my distance from Eric and my parents' drama. I still send money home occasionally, but not nearly as much as Eric. He never misses a chance to remind everyone about that. Things came to a head recently at a family wedding. My cousin was getting married, and I flew back to my home country for the first time in years. I should have known it would be a mistake. From the moment I arrived, Eric kept throwing digs at me, asking why I didn't settle down like a normal person. At one point during the reception, he cornered me, bringing up something he's been harping on for months: Luis. Luis works in the US, legally on a work visa, and has been doing so for years. He's someone I've worked closely with in my business, and we've become close friends over time. Eric has this insane idea that Luis is somehow using me to get ahead in life or secure permanent residency. He brought it up again at the wedding in front of a group of relatives, loudly insinuating that I was too gullible to see the truth. I told him to back off, but he didn't let it go. Later that night, I got a call from my mom. She begged me to think about what Eric said, saying she didn't want to see family tension get worse. I told her to stop letting Eric stir up drama, but I could tell she was more worried about keeping him happy than listening to me. A week after I got back to the US, Luis started getting strange calls from unknown numbers. At first, he thought it was just spam, but then the questions started. People were asking for personal details about him, his work, and even his visa status. We laughed it off, thinking it was some kind of weird scam. That is, until Luis got a notice from immigration authorities about an unexpected review of his visa. The timing felt way too convenient. Eric had made threats before. He'd warned me that if I didn't wake up and cut ties with Luis, he'd look into things himself. I thought he was bluffing. I mean, who actually does something like that? But now, I'm not so sure. I called him out of anger, asking if he had anything to do with it. He played dumb but threw in some cryptic comments like, "Sometimes tough love is necessary." Now Luis is stuck in limbo. His visa status is under review, and he's restricted from some work privileges until everything clears up. We've already talked to a lawyer, but the process could take months. The stress is unbelievable. Luis doesn't deserve this, and I can't shake the guilt that I might have underestimated just how far Eric would go. To make things worse, my parents are taking Eric's side. They think he's just looking out for me. Meanwhile, Luis is trying to stay calm, but I can tell he's scared. Immigration issues are no joke, and even though he's done everything by the book, it feels like we're fighting an uphill battle. I posted on Reddit's r/true/off just to see if anyone else has dealt with something like this. The support has been incredible, but the whole situation still feels unreal. I can't believe my own brother would go this far. Update 1. After posting on Reddit, I didn't expect much. Maybe a handful of comments or advice I hadn't thought of. Instead, the post blew up. Thousands of people weighed in, and the overwhelming consensus was that I wasn't overreacting. Eric likely filed a malicious report against Luis. The level of detail strangers picked apart in the comments was mind-blowing. Some even suggested ways to investigate, from checking the source of the complaint to gathering evidence that Luis and I had done nothing wrong. It was reassuring, but it also confirmed what I was dreading. Eric probably wasn't bluffing. A week later, Luis had his meeting with immigration. He came back tense but calm, holding a folder of paperwork. Immigration officials told him they'd received an anonymous report claiming he was involved in a fraudulent relationship to secure permanent residency. The accusation was laid out in disturbing detail, including his work schedule, the neighborhood where he lived, and even minor things like when he got his driver's license renewed. That kind of information could only come from someone who knew us well. Hearing this made me furious. I called Eric again. This time, he laughed off my accusations and said I was being paranoid. Then he added, "If you make bad choices, don't blame others for the consequences." I knew then he was behind it. The timing, the level of detail, everything pointed to him. Louis' family stepped in immediately. His sister, who's always been incredibly organized, started pulling together documents to prove everything about his visa and work status was legitimate. They included proof of his long employment history, tax returns, and anything else that could support his case. I offered to help, but Luis and his family seemed determined to shield me from the bulk of the stress. Even so, the tension was starting to build between us. We started having arguments, not about each other but about everything going on around us. He worried that my family would never accept him, and that this would keep happening no matter how much we proved his innocence. I could see where he was coming from, but there was nothing I could say to fix it. We met with a lawyer who specialized in immigration cases. He told us the accusations would be hard to disprove because immigration reviews are designed to err on the side of caution. Still, he reassured us that Lewis had a strong case because of his spotless record and work history. That gave us some hope, but the process was already taking its toll. A few days after that meeting, I got a text from Eric. It was short but infuriating. Sometimes tough love is the only way you'll learn. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. When I told my parents about the text, they dismissed it as Eric looking out for me. My mom said he was just worried about my future and suggested I listen to him. I hung up the call before I said something I'd regret. By now, Louis' work situation was also being affected. His employer let him know that immigration authorities had contacted them, which made Louis feel like his job was on shaky ground. That was the breaking point for me. I shared an update on Reddit, explaining everything that had happened since my first post. The response was overwhelming again, with hundreds of people urging me to cut ties with Eric. Meanwhile, our lawyer had been digging into the complaint. He confirmed what we suspected. The report had been submitted anonymously, but the IP address used to file it was linked directly to Eric's home. There was no longer any doubt in my mind. Eric had crossed a line and we needed to take action. We passed this information to the immigration authorities, who acknowledged it but told us the review process would still take time. They couldn't just close the case because of malicious intent. They still had to go through every step of the review to confirm Louis' status. As all this was happening, Eric escalated his smear campaign against me. He told our extended family that I was ungrateful and letting a stranger ruin our family. Some relatives called me, parroting his accusations and pleading with me to fix things with Eric. I didn't bother explaining myself. At this point, I decided enough was enough. I blocked Eric's number and all his social media accounts. The fallout was immediate. My parents accused me of tearing the family apart and begged me to forgive Eric. I told them that until they acknowledged what he had done, I couldn't continue the conversation. Even though cutting off Eric gave me some peace, the damage he caused was still very real. Louis was trying to stay strong, but I could see how much this was affecting him. And as much as I hated to admit it, there were moments when I wondered if the fight was worth it. The comments on my second Reddit post kept me going. Strangers shared their own stories about dealing with toxic family members, offering advice and encouragement. They reminded me that sometimes protecting your peace means walking away, even if it's from family. We're still waiting for the immigration review to finish, but the lawyer is confident we'll come out on top. For now, I'm trying to focus on what I can control, supporting Louise, keeping my distance from Eric, and staying true to what I know is right. Update 2. Things have escalated since my last post, but we're finally taking steps to fight back. After finding out the complaint against Louis came from Eric's IP address, Louis' lawyer suggested filing a formal complaint against him for submitting a false report. It wasn't an easy decision. We knew it could blow things up even more with my family, but at this point, we couldn't just let it slide. Louis' lawyer submitted the paperwork, outlining the evidence linking Eric to the anonymous tip. The lawyer explained that while immigration authorities might not take immediate action against Eric, having the malicious report on record could work in our favor. Louis' employer has also been incredibly supportive through all of this. His boss wrote a glowing character reference, emphasizing Louis' hard work, dedication, and how he's been a model employee for years. It's the kind of thing that makes you realize not everyone is out to tear you down. Meanwhile, I've stuck to my decision to go completely no contact with Eric. I blocked his number, his social media accounts, and even email. My parents, however, haven't let up. They've been calling nonstop, begging me to forgive and forget because family is forever. Every call is the same: guilt trips, emotional pleas, and excuses for Eric's behavior. At one point, my mom even suggested that Eric was just trying to protect me. Protect me from what? Someone who's done nothing but follow the law and work hard. Then, the anonymous messages started. At first, I thought they were random spam, but the timing and content made it clear they weren't. These messages were full of the same accusations Eric had been throwing around, claims that Louis was using me and that I was blind to the truth. I have no proof it's Eric, but I wouldn't be surprised. The messages were relentless, showing up on different platforms no matter how many times I blocked them. Thankfully, Reddit has been a lifesaver. I posted another update there, sharing what's been happening and asking for advice. The support was overwhelming again, with hundreds of people sharing their own experiences dealing with toxic family members. Some even offered resources for handling online harassment. Just knowing we weren't alone made a huge difference. But the peace didn't last long. One afternoon, Eric showed up at my house unannounced. I opened the door, and there he was, standing there like he had every right to be. He didn't waste any time demanding that I listen to reason. I didn't let him in. Instead, I told him through the door that if he didn't leave, I'd call the police. That seemed to catch him off guard, and after some grumbling, he finally left. The next week, we got an update from immigration authorities. They requested a final round of documentation to finish their review of Louis' visa. This was our chance to prove everything once and for all. Louis and I spent hours gathering everything we could: photos from family events, joint financial records, even witness statements from mutual friends who could vouch for how long we've known each other. It was exhausting but necessary. While we were busy preparing, Eric continued his games. My parents called again, sounding more desperate than ever. Apparently, Eric had given them an ultimatum. If they didn't pressure me to see reason, he would stop sending them money. Knowing how much they rely on him financially, this felt like a new low even for him. I shared all of this in another Reddit update. Writing it out felt cathartic, but it also highlighted just how toxic the family dynamic had become. The responses poured in again, with people urging me to stay strong and stick to my boundaries. Some even pointed out how manipulative Eric's ultimatum was, which only solidified my resolve. That resolve was tested a few days later. After weeks of holding it together, I finally broke down. The stress of everything, Luis' case, the family pressure, the constant harassment, became too much. I found myself questioning if any of this was worth it. Luis, being the steady rock he always is, sat down with me and calmly reassured me that we'd get through this together. His patience and kindness reminded me why we were fighting so hard in the first place. The fallout from all this has started to ripple through the extended family. Some relatives are taking Eric's side, calling me ungrateful for not appreciating everything he's done for the family. Others, however, have reached out privately to say they support me and are horrified by Eric's behavior. It's been eye-opening, to say the least. Finally, there was a breakthrough. Our lawyer got word from immigration that the complaint against Luis was deemed not credible. While this doesn't close the case entirely, it's a huge step forward. It proves what we've been saying all along, that Eric's actions were malicious and baseless. For the first time in weeks, I feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. The road ahead isn't easy, but I've made a decision. I'm done letting Eric control my life, directly or indirectly. No matter how this ends, Luis and I will focus on building a future free from his influence. Update 3. After months of living under a cloud of uncertainty, Luis finally received the news we'd been waiting for. Immigration authorities confirmed that his visa review was complete and his status was reinstated without issue. The official letter stated that the complaint was deemed unfounded and classified as malicious. It was a huge relief, but the authorities also clarified they wouldn't pursue Eric directly unless Luis filed a formal case against him. At least Luis' record was clean, and we could breathe again. With this chapter closing, I knew it was time to confront my parents. I needed them to understand the damage Eric had caused. When I called, I laid everything out, how Eric's actions nearly derailed Luis' life, jeopardized his job, and caused months of unnecessary stress. I thought they'd be horrified or at least willing to acknowledge Eric's wrongdoing. Instead, they defended him, saying he was only acting out of love and concern for me. It was like talking to a wall. A few days later, I found out through mutual family connections that Eric had been bragging about his so-called intervention. He painted himself as a hero, claiming he'd stepped in to save me from making a terrible mistake. Hearing this made my blood boil. The audacity of him framing this nightmare as some noble act was beyond belief. Meanwhile, Luis' employer decided to step up in a big way. Not only did they acknowledge the stress Luis had been under, but they also offered him a promotion. On top of that, they began working on a permanent residency sponsorship for him, which would add an extra layer of stability to his life in the US. It felt like a turning point after everything we'd endured. Encouraged by the support we were receiving from Reddit and Luis' employer, we decided to consult our lawyer about taking legal action against Eric. The lawyer explained that while defamation cases can be tricky, we had a strong foundation given the malicious report and its consequences. The idea of holding Eric accountable for his actions gave us a sense of control we hadn't felt in months. I decided to post about our situation on our legal advice to get additional input. The community there was incredibly supportive, with many users sharing resources and advice for navigating a defamation case. They emphasized that this wasn't just about seeking justice for Luis, but also about setting a boundary with someone who had repeatedly crossed the line. Of course, Eric didn't take kindly to our decision. Word got out quickly that we were preparing to file a lawsuit, and he wasted no time spreading rumors. He told our extended family that we were suing him out of greed and trying to destroy his reputation. Some relatives took his side, parroting his accusations and accusing me of being ungrateful for everything Eric had done for the family. Others, however, reached out privately to show their support. During the legal process, we stumbled upon a shocking revelation. Eric wasn't as financially secure as he pretended to be. Despite his reputation as the responsible sibling, he was heavily in debt and had been relying on financial help from the family to maintain his facade. This added a new layer to his actions. It seemed like Eric was lashing out because he felt his position in the family was threatened. Predictably, my parents refused to believe any of it. When I brought up Eric's financial troubles, they accused me of trying to ruin his life. No matter how much evidence we presented, they clung to their belief that Eric was the victim. Eventually, we moved forward with filing the lawsuit. The paperwork detailed the financial and emotional damages Luis had suffered because of Eric's false report. As expected, this caused an even deeper rift within the family. Some relatives stopped speaking to us altogether, siding with Eric and blaming us for tearing the family apart. Eric, of course, doubled down. He called the lawsuit frivolous and accused me of being ungrateful for everything he'd done for me. His complete lack of accountability was astonishing. At this point, Luis decided to share his side of the story on Reddit. His post went viral almost immediately. He detailed how the false report had affected his life and career, describing the stress of being under immigration scrutiny despite following every rule. The support he received was overwhelming. People from all walks of life flooded the comments with encouragement, sharing similar experiences and urging him to seek justice. Facing mounting legal pressure, Eric's lawyer reached out with a settlement offer. The terms included a small monetary payment and a vague acknowledgement of wrongdoing. For a moment, we considered it. After all, going to court would be a long and exhausting process. But ultimately, we decided to reject the offer. After everything Eric had put us through, we wanted the truth to come out in court. This fight isn't over yet, but for the first time, it feels like we're on the offensive instead of playing defense. We've regained some of the control Eric tried to take from us, and we're more determined than ever to see this through. Update 4. The court date finally arrived, and it was as tense as we expected. Eric's defense leaned heavily on the narrative that he was a concerned brother who had been misinformed about Luis. He claimed he was only trying to protect me from being taken advantage of. But as the proceedings unfolded, it became clear that his story wasn't holding up. His version of events was riddled with inconsistencies, and he couldn't explain how the anonymous report contained such personal details about Luis and me. Our lawyer didn't waste any time presenting the timeline of Eric's actions. The evidence was airtight. The IP address that submitted the report traced directly back to Eric's home, text messages he had sent me that hinted at his plans, and even notes from the immigration authorities confirming the malicious nature of the complaint. The real turning point came during Eric's cross-examination. The lawyer carefully questioned him about his motivations, and his answers exposed what we already knew. His goal wasn't to protect me, but to control me. He admitted he believed Luis was a threat to the family dynamic and suggested that breaking us apart would bring me back to my senses. That was the final nail in the coffin. The judge ruled in Luis' favor, awarding damages for defamation and emotional distress. Eric was ordered to pay a significant amount, far more than we expected. While we knew Eric wasn't in great financial shape, the judgment hit him harder than anyone anticipated. Within days, word of the court ruling spread through our family. Eric's carefully curated image as the successful sibling fell apart. Relatives who had always seen him as the responsible one were now questioning everything. His financial troubles became public knowledge, and it wasn't long before people started distancing themselves from him. Of course, not everyone was on our side. Some family members accused us of ruining Eric's life. They claimed the lawsuit was excessive and insisted we should have handled things privately. But others were shocked by Eric's behavior and reached out to apologize for ever doubting us. My parents took the news the hardest. They begged me to drop the case and forgive Eric, even after the ruling. To them, his financial collapse wasn't his fault. It was mine for escalating things. I stood firm, telling them that Eric needed to face the consequences of his actions. They didn't take it well, and our relationship remained strained. Back on Reddit, the response to the court victory was incredible. When I updated everyone on the outcome, the post gained even more attention than my previous updates. People congratulated Luis and me for standing our ground and holding Eric accountable. Many shared their own stories about standing up to toxic family members, and the comments felt like a validation of everything we'd gone through. With the case behind us, Luis finally had the space to focus on healing. The stress had taken a toll on him, and he started therapy to process everything he'd endured. His sessions gave him a chance to rebuild his confidence and regain a sense of security. The fallout also brought some unexpected positives. A few family members who had sided with Eric early on reached out to apologize. They admitted they hadn't seen the full picture and regretted taking his word over ours. While I didn't immediately rebuild those relationships, it was nice to see some bridges weren't completely burned. Eric, on the other hand, tried to reconnect in his own way. He sent me a letter, half apology, half justification, framing himself as the victim of a situation that had spiraled out of control. I didn't bother responding. At this point, I knew any engagement with him would only pull me back into his manipulative web. The biggest silver lining in all of this was Luis' permanent residency approval. After years of uncertainty, he finally had the stability he deserved. It felt like a weight had been lifted, not just for him, but for both of us. To celebrate, we decided to take a much-needed vacation. It was the first time in years that we could truly relax without the shadow of Eric's interference looming over us. The trip was a reminder of what we'd fought for, a future free from his toxicity. The entire experience inspired me to take action beyond my personal life. I started volunteering with a local organization that helps immigrants navigate legal challenges. Sharing our story with others and helping them avoid similar pitfalls felt like the best way to turn a negative into something meaningful. Looking back, this journey taught me that family doesn't always mean loyalty and unconditional support. Sometimes, the people closest to you can do the most harm. Setting boundaries and standing up for yourself isn't easy, but it's necessary. For now, Luis and I are focused on building the life we've worked so hard for. And as for Eric, his actions may have cost him more than he bargained for, but that's no longer my concern. Update 5. Life without Eric has been quieter, and that's been a welcome change. After the court case ended, Luis and I made the decision to go completely no contact with him. We blocked every possible avenue he could use to reach us. The silence brought a kind of peace we hadn't felt in years. Without Eric's constant interference, we could finally focus on rebuilding our lives. Luis and I both started therapy shortly after the court case. It wasn't an easy step, but it was necessary. The betrayal and stress had left scars, and therapy helped us process everything in a healthy way. Luis worked on rebuilding his confidence, especially after months of having his character questioned. For me, therapy became a way to understand the toxic patterns in my family and why I had tolerated Eric's behavior for so long. This experience brought Luis and me closer. We made a pact to always be upfront with each other about how we're feeling and to prioritize open communication. The ordeal strengthened our partnership, and we came out of it more resilient than ever. Luis' career took off after the promotion. His employer has been incredibly supportive, not just during the immigration case but afterward as well. They helped streamline his permanent residency process, which was recently approved. The stability allowed Luis to fully focus on his work, and he's already being considered for another leadership role. Watching him thrive has been a silver lining in all of this. My own business has been thriving too. Without the constant distraction of Eric's drama, I've been able to channel my energy into new projects. I even landed a major client recently, which felt like a validation of all the hard work I've put in over the years. Setting boundaries with my parents has been harder. They still don't acknowledge Eric's wrongdoing, and anytime I speak to them, they try to bring him up. I've made it clear that I won't entertain any conversation about him unless they're willing to hold him accountable. While our relationship is still strained, I no longer feel the same guilt I used to. I've accepted that I can't change how they view Eric, but I can control how much influence they have over my life. As for Eric, things haven't been going well for him. After the court ruling, his financial troubles worsened. He had to move back in with our parents, which has strained their relationship. From what I've heard through extended family, he's still spinning the story to make himself the victim, but fewer people are buying it now. His once perfect reputation is in shambles, and he only has himself to blame. On a brighter note, my advocacy work has gained traction. Volunteering with immigrant support groups has been incredibly fulfilling, and recently I was invited to speak at a community event about our experience navigating false accusations. It felt surreal to be recognized for turning such a painful chapter into something positive. I shared a final Reddit post to reflect on everything we've been through. I wrote about how this experience taught me the importance of setting boundaries, even with family, and standing up for what's right. The post resonated with so many people, and it quickly went viral. The comments were filled with others sharing similar stories and thanking us for giving them the courage to make tough decisions in their own lives. Louis' family has been a constant source of support throughout this journey. They've embraced me as one of their own, and being around them feels like a breath of fresh air. Their unconditional love and kindness have shown me what a healthy family dynamic looks like. Looking back, I realize how much energy I wasted trying to earn my family's approval. It took this entire ordeal for me to understand that family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by the people who stand by you, no matter what. Luis and I have started focusing on building our chosen family, surrounding ourselves with people who genuinely care about us. Eric made one last attempt to drag me back into his mess. He sent a letter full of excuses and blaming everyone but himself for his downfall. I didn't bother reading it past the first line. I shredded it and threw it away, just like I've done with the toxic hold he used to have over my life. With the worst behind us, Luis and I have decided to move forward in a big way. We've started planning a small, intimate wedding. It's going to be just close friends and the family members who have supported us through everything. No drama, no toxicity, just love and celebration. This experience also inspired me to start a blog where I share advice for others dealing with toxic family members and immigration challenges. Writing about what we've been through feels cathartic, and knowing that our story might help others is incredibly rewarding. Now, Luis and I are focused on the future. We've been through more than we ever thought we could handle, but we came out stronger. Eric's shadow no longer looms over us, and for the first time in years, we're living life on our own terms.